I was thinking of a spooky vibe when opening this very first podcast. I don't know why. You guys let me know what you think. What does it take to shoot video in hostile conditions, such as under decompression obligations or in overhead environments? That is the topic of this very first DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast. And I'm your host, SCUBA Instructor Trainer and underwater filmmaker, Nick Derutter. I like the DiveSAGA theme tune, and this is the podcast version of it. Let me know what you think. Is that self-centered to like my own theme tune? I'm not sure. Welcome to the first DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast. This podcast is not a replacement of the DiveSAGA YouTube channel, but more so an addition, a behind the scenes, if you will. So you can absolutely consider this as the bonus features on a DVD, let's say. And you're very welcome to follow us on YouTube and on Instagram. On Instagram is a great place to leave suggestions for future topics of the podcast, where we can dive a little bit deeper into some of the episodes, into the dive planning, the filmmaking, and so forth. In this particular episode, I figured it would be nice to introduce myself and what we do on the DiveSAGA channel by diving a little bit into underwater storytelling, diving skill priorities when filmmaking, time constraints, dive site knowledge, sacrifices we make during the process, creative problem solving, good diving habits, and overall safety. So you've got that to look forward to. This first episode is sponsored by ADEX Singapore Ocean Week, the largest scuba diving trade show in Asia. This year's 2026 edition takes place from April 10 to 12 at Suntec in Singapore, and I will be attending and presenting as well. If you're a diver or a diving professional in the Asia Pacific region, you should definitely consider attending too. I will provide a link in the description. For those of you who are not super familiar with the DiveSAGA channel and who are just stumbling upon this podcast, the DiveSAGA YouTube channel covers scuba diving episodes all between 10 and 20 minutes long, where yours truly, me, typically goes to dive sites that are either very iconic or very difficult to reach or unusual. That is the concept, that is the setup. And in this podcast, I would like to zoom in a little bit more into that. I try to make those episodes in the most cinematic way possible, which of course comes with its own set of challenges when the dives themselves are technically complex. Before we dive into any of the technicalities, I'd probably like to focus a little bit on storytelling itself, because I do think that if you do not have a story, you do not have an engaging video, where I think that maybe photography allows a little bit more for the work to stand on its own visual merit. With videography, no story makes for a difficult watch, because of course we have a set time frame that we want the viewers to be engaged. And so the first step is always to start looking for the stories behind those dive sites. And that's not always simple, because quite frankly, some dive sites just do not have a very engaging background story. For instance, certain quarries that are maybe decommissioned quarries flooded with rainwater, where some artifacts have been artificially placed, may not have much more of a story than that. And they can still make for very fine dive sites, of course, but not necessarily for an intriguing story. A good example is very recently we did a series about the world wars in Malta. If you've dived in Malta before, you know it's a wreck diving paradise, but not every wreck has a super crazy story. Some wrecks are artificially sunk, some wrecks are literally placed for tourism purposes and have a very, very minor background, that it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a long story. On the other hand, other wrecks, I think of, for instance, the S-31 Schnellboot, which was a German fast boat with torpedo launchers. That has a really cool story because it sank, sits at 65 meters, and the torpedoes are still on board, unexploded. Add to that the Schnellboot actually was laying mines and sank because of one of its own mines, and you have a really cool background story. So I think anybody who wants to get into underwater filmmaking and maybe wants to start either their own YouTube channel or whatever platform, it's in my opinion, before you even start filming, think of what story you're actually trying to bring. And that's research, right? That work needs to be done first. I have a fair amount of people inviting me to come and shoot at their local dive sites. And it's almost to a fault. I always ask first, what's the story? Why should I come dive there? What's special about this dive site? Because I know that if I can shoot brilliant, beautiful imagery, but there's nothing to say about it, it will not hold attention. But if we have a good story, honestly, I could shoot it on a potato cam and people would still watch it. I noticed that as well in our analytics, that stories that or videos where I think maybe the visuals could have been better, the story usually holds that up. Whereas videos with nice visuals, but not the best story, they usually don't perform very well. Once we've decided to shoot somewhere, I think it's very important to always put in the forefront our own safety and an order of priorities. I have my own set of priorities because you're dealing with a lot of things. Yeah, it's not because you are, for instance, a cave diver and you know how to use a camera that 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 very quickly equals 3, 4, 5. It's you don't just divide your attention between, let's say, the cave line and the camera. It's not a 50-50. It very quickly becomes a lot more difficult than it seems. So I think it's important to make a bit of a contract with yourself and the team of what your order of priorities is going to be. Yeah, so I would say probably in a cave environment, first order of priority, the line, the environment, your buoyancy, your trim, the team, and only then maybe the camera, the lights, and so forth. I would absolutely never consider where to even put a light if I wasn't 100% certain of where in the cave I was. And I think that sounds obvious, but you will not be the first person who gets completely lost because they are diving their whole dive through a small 4-inch screen instead of with full and complete awareness. A good example of a dive like this is in Le Gouffre de Cabouille. It's a cave in France that we shot this summer. So it's a cave dive, but it's also a CCR dive, a rebreather dive. It was a scooter dive because we were using DPVs. There's some navigation involved, not super complex, but there is this extra exit which we were actually using as part of our dive plan. So you have to confirm that as well. And then on top of all of that, it's a film dive. So you can see how it's very easy to task load yourself. It's very easy to become overwhelmed or to get lost in the process. And I think the last thing that you want is to be 1.5-2 kilometers into a cave, being completely absorbed by the filmmaking and forgetting how far you actually are, how much time it's going to take to get out, not just under normal conditions, but to get out under emergency conditions, because let's not forget that a dive is a dive and things can always go wrong. So it's important to realize that even if shit hits the fan, can we say shit on the podcast? I think we can. We make the rules. Yes, on the podcast we can say it. Even if shit hits the fan, you still have to be able to make your way out safely. So very important, I think, to keep that order of priorities front and center, and not just you, but the whole team. It cannot be a smart way of operating that the team carries the photographer or the videographer through the dive. I think even if your whole team falls dead on the spot, you should still be 110% in control of the dive. One aspect that people sometimes don't think about filmmaking in these, what I call hostile conditions. I call them hostile because, well, there are limitations that maybe regular scuba dives don't have or don't have as much. One of those being serious time constraints. So whether this is decompression obligations or in a cave travel distance, this is a bit like making regular videos, making regular film, but with a time bomb strapped under your ass. Ass being also a word we can say on the DiveSAGA podcast, I think. A good example of this is, for instance, the SS Polynesian that we did in our Malta World War series as well. It's a wreck, World War I, so it's over 100 years old, super beautiful, but sits at 65 meters and is 150 meters long. So it's quite a big wreck, actually. And I already had my doubts as to whether we'd be able to cover the whole wreck in one dive. And this being a cooperation with Visit Malta, so the tourism authority there, we simply only had the one dive to get it done. And this is a site that's known for having very strong currents. We were diving scooters once again, but I already had an idea it wasn't going to work. I think we had some 25 minutes of bottom time because we were on open circuit. And that makes for a very, very challenging filming experience. And then you have to prioritize. We actually landed in the middle of the wreck. I knew that on the stern is a nice big cannon, plus you have, of course, the propeller underneath at the stern. So definitely the most interesting features there. So basically turned the whole team towards the stern as quickly as possible, shot all of that, and then started making our way towards the bow, seeing how far we would get. But indeed we ran out of time before we could get there. Of course you can salvage that in the story and make the stern the goal of the dive, let's say, to see the cannon. So you can always fix it a little bit in the story. But it is not a small consideration that you're basically staging lights, for instance, in a cave. You're staging divers, you're hunting down your shot list, making your shots, but all under a ticking clock. And I know people who work in film production will say, well, we definitely also work with a ticking clock, right? Producers also don't take kindly to staff who takes all the time in the world, who also have a shot list to get through. But the difference is, of course, that as far as I know, the punishment for overshooting the ticking clock is not death. And in cave diving or decompression diving, it can be. Right? It absolutely can be, or at the very minimum, you're going to end up with very, very difficult decompression times. So, and worst case scenario, you're going to run out of gas, of course, or end up with DCS. So this is something that it takes a lot of timekeeping and a lot of management. So where even without filming, most technical dives, whether they be deco or cave, will require some form of timekeeping, whether you hit your waypoints at certain times. But of course, here you have, if you're working with a shot list, for instance, you literally add that shot list to the time schedule and try to see if you can make it. And that's not always easy, because sometimes we have previous knowledge of the dive site and sometimes we don't. And it's a very different way of working, to be honest. If we do not have any previous knowledge of the dive site, I try to see to it that we can do a familiarization dive. It is really difficult to shoot a dive site that we've only ever heard about or read about on paper or through a local guide, but that we haven't seen with our own eyes. It's very difficult to estimate the scale of things, whether we can stage lights, and just in general, what are the beautiful spots going to be. But sometimes it simply isn't possible. I think of one dive that we did in Mexico with Robbie Schmittner, I think one of the most known exploration divers over there. He has his, I think by now somewhat famous or infamous massive underwater chamber called Yap Yum. It's the chamber, I believe, is some 60 meters deep, 100 meters across. So it's a huge volume, just this massive black void under the ground. But it takes a good hour of diving before you even get there. So an hour of cave dive before you get there. And then of course an hour back. And all of that itself is a really long drive and then walk into the jungle. So it's not super easy to get to. And this is a good example of a dive where we had one shot. We were able to go once. And so in those cases, it's almost impossible to conceive shots that you want to get and to try and stage those, because you're also going to probably spend a lot of time staging those shots. And if you have one dive, then that's probably time you do not have. So in those cases, you might have to construct a dive plan where perhaps you let the leading diver carry a video light, make sure everything is lit nicely in front of you, but so that you also have a diver in the shot. Perhaps you have a diver behind you without a video light, but that you can turn yourself towards to get shots, shot variety. So of not only a diver swimming away in front of you, but also a diver swimming towards you. And to be honest, to a point, it is also a little bit of just hyper focus. This particular dive, I think, was 2.5 hours long in Yapium. And it is, to be honest, just 2.5 hours of, in my case, hyper focus of constantly trying to see the shots and get them while they are happening, especially once we entered that massive underwater chamber. And I do recommend you go check out that episode, by the way. Once we hit that massive underwater chamber, it's very overwhelming because it's black void below you, above you, and all around you. So it definitely does something to you, and in all that you then have to basically keep your cool, keep your eyes on your list of priorities, the line, the environment, buoyancy, trim, and so forth, not lose the team, obviously, and just try to get your shots. And that is a very chaotic way of working. It's my least favorite way of working, but sometimes there's no other option. And I can assure you, on those type of shoots, the whole ride home, all I can think about is, I hope I got it, because you're so hyper focused on getting those shots that you're not likely to remember all of them as much, because your brain is just working on making a safe dive and getting the beautiful shots. They're simply not your memory is simply not as active. And so I have this toxic, I think, habit of needing to then come home and immediately review all the footage to reassure myself that we got it. So that's, I don't know if that's toxic, but I would call that a red flag, maybe a beige flag, I don't know. Of course, there are also dive sites where you have the previous knowledge, where you have dived before. That's ideal. If we're able to do a few recon dives before, even take some photos, because then we can communicate during the briefings on how we're going to set up our plan, how we're going to set up shots. When we do it that way, that allows us to premeditate a lot of the shots. And I think if you look at once again, our French Caves series from this summer, Marchepied being a very good example, the one with it starts with a restriction, but we're able to stage a lot of shots. So you get a lot more shot variety. For instance, that dive does start with a restriction, but it was an oiled team. So we were able to send someone ahead, have them turn around, point one camera towards the restriction. As I come through, I have a camera on me as I go through the restriction. So because you know that's going to happen, you are able to much more premeditate all of that, set it up. And it does make, in my opinion, for a little bit nicer viewing experience. Although I guess you guys can let me know. I don't know if you notice that, if you can pick it out. But it also allows us to stage lights here and there. So we can have shots of divers swimming from left to right, lights staged above, behind, below. It's a little bit more painterly. I call them the money shots. So we are able to set up those money shots. And we still have, of course, the regular dive shots where we dive behind someone or in front of someone. But you are able to then set up 5 to 10 money shots that look really good. They also look really good in trailers, on thumbnails, etc. And it's my favorite way of working, because you really also get to paint much more of a picture, right? It's just much more of a creative process, I think. And I usually know during the shoot that it's going well. I don't need to review the footage as much. Plus I have that shot list that we made. So I also know exactly what we did and when we did it. So it's a little bit less chaotic, but not always possible, simply put. You do have to be willing to sacrifice those money shots. I think that, to put it frankly, you have to be willing to be 1 second removed from getting the perfect shot and turn the dive if you have to. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that there is about this type of filmmaking in underwater, in difficult conditions or in difficult environments, is because we have that list of priorities of our line, our environment, our buoyancy, our trim. You will have a turning point. You will hopefully have a predetermined turning point for your dive, and sometimes those two collide. The shot list, the beautiful money shots, and the turning point might start colliding. And I think this is obvious, but still, obviously the turning point takes priority over the shot list. And that can be so difficult because usually you have some kind of goal, some kind of point to your story that you want to reach, and not getting your last 1 or 2 money shots might mean that you simply did not get to the point of your story. And you have to be willing to let that go. You have to be willing to make that sacrifice, knowing that the whole team is there to make this happen, knowing that you might not be able to come back to this place to finish the job, knowing that you've spent money, time, resources on this shoot. But it is probably the most important thing, and I would say again the most difficult thing, because it can be so intoxicating to be in the flow, working, getting your shots, creating, and yeah, overshooting a time limit can have serious consequences in these types of environments, of course. Luckily, these types of environments also force you to get creative. Yeah? Sometimes the constraints force you to start experimenting a little bit, both with working differently and with working perhaps more quickly, getting your shots in a more efficient way. I mentioned earlier our Gouffre de Cabouille cave dive in France. This was a 3-point-something kilometer dive, so I think it was 1.6 in, 1.6 out. And so that's a scooter dive. And it was, we had done a recon dive before, but we will not be able to do more than one film dive again. For those of you who know this cave, also know that it's notoriously poor visibility. And we were lucky to have it in a moment where the visibility was absolutely mind-blowing for that specific cave. So we managed to squeeze in that film dive, but not much more than that. And so the solution we came up with was to essentially mount a 360 camera, 360 degrees camera on the nose of the scooter. So with an invisible selfie stick, and then about 1 meter, 3 feet ahead of the scooter, have the camera. Now, of course, that would leave you with a black hole everywhere around the camera, unless you then thought about where to put your lights. So then we have diver number 1 has essentially a video light and is lighting up the whole cave. Diver number 2 is me, the scooter with the 360 camera on it. Now, if we face the camera towards me, then we would still see nothing. So I have then light mounted on the scooter, but facing me. So I'm essentially driving like a deer in the headlights. I see nothing because my face needs to be lit up. That's a little tricky. If we think back to our list of priorities, the line, the cave environment, and so forth, it's not like you can see nothing, but you are definitely squinting for 2.5 hours straight. And then behind me was a diver that instead of a video light, they have a regular dive light, but they shine it directly onto me, but from behind, and that creates a bit of a backlight. So this is a way to light up everything on the fly. And of course, because it's a 360 camera, you're then able to reposition afterwards. You're able to select your composition afterwards. And we did the whole dive like that. So there is not a single predetermined setup in that whole video, even though I think it's a 17-minute episode or something like that. So one of the longer ones. But it's completely shot on the fly. And that idea came from the constraints that were there in the first place, that it was such a long distance to cover. So I do like that. I do like that sometimes the limitations actually feed into the creativity. Another thing that I like to point out is that it's important when you do these types of videos that you ensure that the final product doesn't suggest any bad or unsafe diving habits, because these are typically more difficult dives. That I think goes without saying. You should be trained not only to conduct these dives, but be trained and practiced enough to conduct these dives and shoot in them. But I usually try to take pride in the idea that everybody in those videos needs to look on point. So whoever is the subject, whoever is the diver that we're filming the most, definitely needs to be very put together. Their diving skills need to be on point. And the video can't suggest that we did something unsafe or illegal or unruly to get the shots. A good, though maybe less fun example of this is a recent cave series we produced in Mallorca. For that project, a permit was required to dive and to film, and we did obtain the necessary authorization. In the episode itself, I also made a point of explaining to the viewer that diving in these caves without a permit is not allowed, because we never want to give the impression that this is something people should go and do casually or illegally, of course. I think that's very important. After publication, the responsible authorities informed us that, in their view, the series did not fully comply with their regulatory framework, particularly regarding how protected sites can be presented and used. And so, therefore, we chose to remove the content immediately. For us, that was an important reminder that underwater filmmaking doesn't stop at getting permission to enter a dive site, and these environments also involve many different stakeholders, and ultimately the legal stakeholders, so the authorities responsible for their protection, have the final say. So part of being a responsible underwater filmmaker is not only obtaining the right permits beforehand if that's required, but also remaining attentive to how the work is interpreted afterwards and being willing to adapt or step back if required, even if your original intent was purely educational, which here was the case. And that also includes also being aware of how your audience may see and interpret your work. Same thing goes with touching underwater artifacts, with poor dive planning, with minimal deco habits and stuff like that. I think it's very important to try and lead by example, especially if you know that your final videos are going to be watched by a lot of people who might imitate, who might emulate. I think it's important to put some thought into that. Sometimes you can have a perfectly safe, premeditated dive, but through the edit, it seems a little bit sloppy. And you have to think about that as well when you're editing, that you make it logical how you get from point A to B, or make it logical how you plan to get in and or out of a situation. And that you, again, don't do anything that is illegal or immoral. And lastly, I would say that you need to let the story unfold while keeping it safe, right? You can, of course, make your shot lists and have your planning to the best of your abilities, work with an oiled team, but sometimes things will still happen. Sometimes things will still unfold during the dive without the plan, completely unplanned. A good example that I have here is last year when we were shooting our Boyai Mines mini-series. So this is a flooded mine complex in Kanchanaburi, Thailand, that Mikko Pasi is exploring. And we were able to join and shoot 4 episodes there. And while we were there, we had an earthquake that shook the region while we were underwater installing a decompression habitat. And so this was completely unplanned for, of course. And this is tricky because clearly something was happening that was not normal, but we didn't know what it was. We didn't know it was an earthquake. We just heard a big rumble and felt a bit of shaking, I would say, but I thought maybe it was a collapse. And so it's tricky because on one hand, you know that something, let's say, special is happening, or something unusual and therefore worth documenting is happening. But at the same time, you're in a mine shaft with zero visibility because we were installing a decompression habitat, we were working. So you need to keep your head in the game for that. You need to, of course, make your way out. You need to keep your dive safe. And you want to keep shooting because you think something extraordinary is happening. So there as well, I think is a very big exercise in keeping the dive safe, executing your plan, but also letting you be guided by the dive's events a little bit. And that is not the simplest thing as well. So there as well, I would say you can practice that, right? Any type of underwater filmmaking, start super, super easy. Start open water, start shallow, start without lights, and start adding little bits of difficulties as you go. I will not recommend that you become tech certified or cave certified and then immediately drag the camera in there. I think that's an absolute recipe for disaster. Because even if you have everything planned, you might be overwhelmed. As I said earlier, 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when it comes to those type of skills. 1 + 1 easily equals 3, 4, or 5. And secondly, because you might not yet have the experience to deal with the unexpected, you might get swept away by these unexpected events, wanting to document them because your instinct tells you it's special, and you might lose control of the dive, you might lose control of safety, you might lose the team, and so forth. So there as well, that experience is hard-earned and needs to be earned for sure. So build that up slowly. And I would say, once again, focus on the story, focus on the storytelling. You can find safe and fairly easy dive sites with very interesting stories and start practicing there, and then turn up the difficulty meter as you go. That's what I have for you for the first DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast. I want to thank you guys for listening, and I want to thank 8X Singapore for supporting us. Remember that you can find me at 8X Singapore April 10 to 12, and I would love for you guys to visit as well. You should consider following us on Instagram and YouTube at DiveSAGA, and you can always leave suggestions for future DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcasts episodes. I will see you next time. Well, I guess I won't see you. I won't even hear you. I guess you guys will hear me. Bye-bye.